everybody. Welcome to another episode of Industry Night, the show that takes you on a deep dive on the happenings in the hospitality community. If you're new here, hi. And if you're old here, also hi. Thanks so much for joining us, or me, but there's a lot of people on today. So a little background on me, if you don't know who I am or why you're actually here. I've been covering the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years. It all started with a little online e-zine called thelistareyouonit.com. The only website in the DC metro area that talks about absolutely everything that's happening. Every event, every opening, every promotion. If it's going on, it's totally in there. I have a whole little group of magical elves that upload all that information, and it is an amazing aggregate of what's happening in the DC metro area. You should also tune in every Sunday to Foodie and the Beast, the DC area's only food and wine variety show. My husband David and I have been doing that show now for almost 16 years. And we've had everybody on that show, from the Jean Georges and Thomas Kellers and Wolfgang Pucks of the world to somebody who makes jam around the corner. So it's always a good time to listen in. Of course, you follow me at NYCCINELLIS on all the platforms, including YouTube, because this show, Industry Night, now in its 7th year, is also on YouTube. So you can hear my voice, but you can also see me if you are so inclined. Okay, let's get into today's show. I have so much going on, and I'm going to have to look at my notes a bit today because there's so much happening. Okay, so I'm here at the Capitol Jewish Museum. Again, you see my gorgeous display behind me. They are hosting the show for the whole month because they have this fabulous exhibit. I mean, they have tons of fabulous exhibits, but their special exhibit that's here until August is called I'll Have What She's Having, and it's a whole celebration of deli culture. And I was talking with all my guests before the show about deli culture, and really what it is about our own experience with food and deli for me personally. But here at the museum, you can really walk through it. So if you haven't had a chance to come and check it out, you really need to get down here to see it. Last week, I had Joan Nathan on the show. She came with a gorgeous challah that was so yummy and delicious. And while challahs are not a staple of a deli, a lot of people do go there on Fridays to pick them up. Now, you can also go to a deli for bagel and schmears and pastrami, which you should be getting on rye, which totally segues to one of my guests today, Michael Weissman. So she is a food writer, she's an author, she is a teacher, she's a writing teacher, she's a coach. She wears a lot of different hats, but her very first book is A History of Women in America, which she co-authored with her college best friend, which I adore. And it's sold over more than 250,000 copies, and it is still in print today, which I think is amazing. That's 4 decades later. She and I actually met because she has this fabulous book about the different waves of coffee called God in a Cup. And she was actually on this show probably about 5 years ago when I was still at the Line Hotel doing this show. And we went on a deep dive all about coffee and the multiple waves. She went into the 3rd wave, if I'm correct. But I think we're on a 4th wave now, so she has another book to write. But I have her book today, which is called The Rye Bread Marriage. And this is her memoir, and it's so beautiful. It's such a great book, and I related to so much in it. It is about food, it is about rye bread, but it is also about marriage, specifically hers. But there's so many great stories in here about how she really learned about her husband in order to better her relationship with him, which I think we could all take a piece of advice from, because sometimes I really don't want to learn a thing about my husband. But anyway, that's a different show. So because I'll Have What She's Having, the deli exhibit is here at the Capitol Jewish Museum, how could I not invite Jason Berry, who is with Need Hospitality? He's just opened a deli, and I'm really afraid to say it because I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce it, but it's Berezovsky's. Say it again. Berezovsky's. You try it. See if you can say it. Anyway, he's going to come on and talk about the fact that he and his husband and partner, Michael, have opened up a deli on top of all their other restaurants that they have around town. So we'll get into that in just a sec. But I've got Malky back with me. She's with the museum. And one of the things we were talking about is the Capital Jewish Museum in its entirety. What was it that people came together and were like, we need a museum to celebrate Jewishness in DC? Because you and I have talked about this before. I think a lot of people hear Capital Jewish Museum and they're like, I mean, you got the Holocaust Museum down the street, which is obviously not a celebration of Jews, especially not those in DC. So where did it all come from?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you for having me back. It's good to see you again,
Of course.
always. I think, the museum itself started as the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Washington. And that actually came together in part to preserve the historic Addis Israel synagogue that we have. It was going to be demolished due to economic development, and members of the Jewish community said, no, this is really important, we need to preserve it. And so they lobbied Congress, got together, and kind of took ownership of it and have protected it, and it's moved a total of 3 times from its original place in the past 40 plus years. 60 plus years. And I think what they recognized as they were doing it is that we have this wonderful local community that is both amazingly local and also wonderfully national in so many ways. We have, members of the Jewish community who are known internationally for the work they do in DC as part of the government, as part of, major international development companies, and now we are able to convey and share so much of what they've accomplished and how they've both enhanced our local community and also the national and international community because of all the work they did. And I think, the Holocaust Museum is so incredibly important and shares such an important...
But it's not a celebration.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing here, is we are celebrating the Jewish community. We feel very strongly about all the positive contributions that it's made and really want to honor it and celebrate it as much as we can.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate that. I'm so glad you guys are hosting me. And next week we'll talk more about I'll Have What She's Having and the exhibit and all the fun stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
So it was great learning more about the museum with Malky, and now I'm here with Jason Berry of Need Hospitality and Design. Let's just, before we get into the deli, which I cannot pronounce, but I'm working on it, I promise.
We'll practice.
You guys have sort of taken over a large swath of restaurant real estates in this city. Like about, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, Succotash?
Our first one, yeah, good job.
Succotash?
2017.
I mean, dude, do you not know that I do this for a living?
Yeah.
So let's talk about how you, just quickly, how you two got into the business and how you decided to launch all these restaurants.
I've been in the restaurant industry since I was 15 years old, so 10 years. Just kidding. 36 years. Started at Wendy's. Mayonnaise, ketchup, pickle, onion, tomato, lettuce, and mustard at the drive-thru. They took me off the drive-thru and put me on cashier because I screwed up many burgers. Waited tables in college, and have just always loved hospitality. My family, my father was an attorney who worked all the time and didn't cook much except for holidays, and so took me to restaurants, and that's sort of where we bonded and broke bread and hung out. So hospitality has always been in my veins and in my blood. And Michael, my husband and partner, he also grew up eating in restaurants and worked in the restaurant industry for the last, 25 years
you're
or so.
from LA. Is he also from LA?
He was born in Germany.
Okay.
But his father's American, his mother's German, and he grew up in Germany and in Los Angeles. We met in Los Angeles 26 years ago. So we've been together a long time. And worked for restaurant companies, all over the East Coast, all over the country, and eventually said, well, we've been doing this for other people, let's do it for ourselves.
So Succotash was first.
National Harbor, yeah.
Right, National Harbor, then here in DC
Correct.
at Lee. But you have a variety.
We do.
With Mi Vida, Casa, Gatsby's, The Grill, all different. I know. See, look at this.
Du jour.
Yes. So you have a lot of different themes, if you will.
We do. A lot of different concepts.
Concepts and cuisines, and now you're putting your toe in the deli water. What was it about doing a deli that you're like, I got to do a deli?
So Michael and I had talked for a long time about always wanting to do a deli. It's we love diners and we love delis, and we grew up eating in them. And
Are there a lot of diners in LA?
yeah,
Because
all over the
I grew
place.
up in New Jersey. Like that's
Not as many as
total
on the
diner
East Coast.
culture, right?
But to a lot of people, I think a deli is a diner in some ways for a lot of people, especially if they're not familiar with deli culture or diner culture. And there's a lot of similarities, in my opinion, in
well,
terms
in
of
New
what's
Jersey, all the
served.
diners are owned by Greeks.
Right. So, you know, we always wanted to do a deli, but we didn't. The real estate, the location never really came up. And then we had the opportunity to reconcept one of our locations next door to Gatsby into a deli.
Okay.
And it's mostly takeout. There's 10 seats, 12 seats plus a patio. But really the intent is takeout. Everything is takeout. You order at the counter. And we wanted to do something that sort of pays homage to our nostalgia, to the traditions that we grew up with eating. You know, my first serving job was in a deli, Jerry's Deli,
Okay.
in Los Angeles, working graveyard shifts on the weekends. I mean, this has been in my blood my whole life. My father used to bring home food from Greenblatt's on Sunset Boulevard, which is now closed, but it was the most expensive place to get anything deli related, but it was like the gourmet version. Of course, my dad wanted the gourmet version.
Of course.
When he wasn't going to Costco, he was doing the gourmet deli. And so this was just something we've always loved. And DC doesn't have a lot of this for some reason. And so we felt that there was an opportunity to bring a piece of nostalgia and history and our culture into a city that we felt had a need.
And what about the food that's on the menu? So, I mean, can people walk in, like, how are you doing your pastrami? How are you doing your roast beef? How are you building your sandwiches? I know you're naming them, which is really sort of
Yeah.
famous for delis. All delis
We
do
named
that,
them all after family.
which I love.
Yeah, London, our daughter, it's London, eat your veggies.
Okay.
Because that's a challenge for her. She's 2. And, you know, veggies are not center of her plate in her head.
Of course.
So we're working on that. But everything is named after family. And all the sandwiches are traditional. You know, the Reuben, we have a play on the French dip. We have a chicken salad sandwich. We have knishes. We have pierogi. We have bagels with cream cheese, with lox,
Are
with
you
white
making
fish.
your own bagels?
No.
Okay.
We buy them from a company in the Bronx.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they're made in New York and they're shipped down. And I would love to make our own bagels. But
I know
we don't have a
really
lot of
labor,
space to do
it's
that.
labor intensive.
Yeah, but these are, you know, we wanted to dip our toe and get started and develop, see what sells, see what doesn't, and see
So
what
can
people are
people
interested
come in and just get sandwiches, or can people come in, like growing up for me, my dad would go to the deli on Sunday, pick up bagels and lox, all the fishes, like smoked sturgeon and kippered salmon,
Right.
like, oh God, all that
See,
stuff
all
was
the
so
nostalgia,
good.
right?
And then, so we would have that, we would have brunch on Sundays.
You make a platter at home, right?
He didn't make it, my mother put it
but
together.
it was.
He bought it.
You built your own
Yes,
at the table.
and we all built it.
Yeah.
And then dinner that night, like Sunday night, my parents always went out on Saturday nights, right? They went into the city, they went out.
Right.
So she wasn't cooking Saturday, and she wasn't cooking Sunday.
Right.
So Sunday night was
Deli takeout.
deli. You know, we had like roast beef, turkey, pastrami, corned beef, mustard, coleslaw, Russian dressing, rye bread, like all like.
100%.
That was my day. That was Sunday. I was gobsmacked when I found out that not everybody did that. Like, that was so upsetting for me.
Harder for them when they came to your house on Sundays and you
Without
had
a
to
doubt.
show them what's going on.
Yes.
So we sell everything by the half pound and pound.
Okay.
So that people can make their own platters.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for Memorial Day, we had family over and friends over, and we did platters, and everybody was eating corned beef and turkey and pastrami and brisket, and they were building their own sandwiches. And
Yum.
you know, whatever you wanted on it, rye bread, we do challah, we do marbled rye. We keep it simple. It's not, you know, a 17-page menu. It's just not possible in today's climate. And
No.
also, the more choice you give, the harder it is for people to order and make decisions. So give them what they want. And we also have a sandwich called the Karen's Creation, named after Michael's mom, where you get to build your own. So if you don't like what we've got, if you want, you know, a Reuben without the sauerkraut, build your own.
Gotcha.
You know, so it makes it easy.
What about desserts? Like, do we have black and whites?
Of course.
You know, just
Yes.
curious.
Black and whites,
Uh-huh.
arugula.
Yum.
We do a banana pudding.
Okay.
So those are the first few desserts.
Cool.
Potato salad, coleslaw, knishes, latkes,
Oh,
A lot of it, we did
You
a
have
lot.
a lot on the menu.
We do.
I mean, I did look at it, but it's
All the basics.
Right.
All the things you need to say you're legit.
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm so excited. Do you want to talk about the pop-up?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Yes. I mean,
so,
you won't have because this won't be out for 3.5 weeks. But go ahead.
Well, we don't open till June 12th.
Okay. Well, we'll
But
see.
so we have a restaurant in DuPont Circle called Casa,
Mm-hmm.
and we only open that for brunch on the weekends and
Okay.
dinner during the week and the weekends. And so we're adding Berezovsky's Deli pop-up Monday through Friday from 8 to 3, and we're launching breakfast. So
Ooh.
you can get deli breakfast and deli lunch and all the same stuff we offer at the Capitol Riverfront next to Gatsby at the ballpark. And we're starting that June 12th. So we're really excited to bring that to DuPont Circle, which we think also has a great need for great pastrami and corned beef and latkes and corned beef hash. We're actually going to do something that's really cool. It's a latke Benedict. So
Oh,
instead
I'm
of
totally here
instead
for
of
it.
the bread, it's
Yes.
a latke. I mean, come on.
I mean,
What else do you need?
I think you
in
can
life?
put anything on latkes. I like sour cream and salmon.
100%.
I mean, I'll
They're
do
a
anything.
very
An egg.
versatile vehicle for whatever
They're
goes
just-
in your mouth.
Right, exactly.
100%.
They're an excellent base. I
Yeah.
agree.
So we're really excited about that. And
Can we talk about the collab?
sure.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I'm very excited about this.
So June 1st, for the month of June, we start a chef collab series. We're going to work with local chefs, interesting chefs, maybe some national people if it happens. And we're working with Chef Mike Friedman and from Aventino and
Red Hen.
Red Hen, of course, very popular place. And he is from Jersey. And he's a fellow Jew, and we are doing a Jersey Sloppy Joe, which I believe you've heard of.
I am so excited.
Yeah.
So, as I told you, I know you're doing this in June, but Yom Kippur for Break the Fast, everybody in New Jersey has a platter of sloppy joes on the table. I'm just
Maybe
telling
it
you.
will resurface.
Okay, for those of you who don't know what a sloppy joe is, from New Jersey, they only make them in New Jersey. It is 3 layers of rye bread and different meats, so with Russian dressing and coleslaw. So the top is coleslaw and Russian dressing, and then the bottom is either pastrami and turkey or corned beef and roast beef or turkey and
I think
roast
we're doing
beef.
corned beef and pastrami.
That also sounds delicious. Anyway, they are delicious, and you're going to be so happy that you've
And
heard about
super
them.
light and healthy and
Oh,
no
yeah.
carbs.
Sure, absolutely.
No sodium. I mean,
All the things.
really just.
Actually, he has thrown down the gauntlet off show because you told me that I couldn't eat the whole thing. And
I couldn't.
I'm
I
gonna-
don't know.
now I
Okay,
feel
but
like I
now
gotta
you
do
have
it.
to. You'll have to do it
I'll
in
take
the
the challenge.
deli. We have to see it live.
Okay, I'm here for it.
All right.
All right, tell everybody where they can find you, please.
We are at the Capitol Riverfront, right in front of Nats Park at the entrance at 1201 Half Street. And then we also open Casa in DuPont Circle at 20th and R at 1647 20th Street Northwest.
Great. Thanks
So
for
we're really
popping
excited.
in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Good
Appreciate
to see
it.
you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. And we're back. I'm here with Michael Weissman. I mentioned her at the beginning of the show and her fabulous book, The Rye Bread Marriage. She is a food writer. She is an author. She is a writing teacher. She is a coach. I told you about her book about coffee, which is amazing. In fact, she was on this show about 5 years ago or 6 years ago when we were still at the Line Hotel, and we talked all about God in a Cup, which was her terrific book about coffee. But now she has this book, and I love this book because it's really a memoir. There's a line in the book that I've mentioned to you already that I just love, and I think it really is the umbrella for the book in my mind. And the line is, how do the stories we live and the stories we inherit play out in our relationships? And I love that line because I'm at that point in my life where I am really realizing that I know all my husband's stories and trauma. I mean, we've been together for over 30 years, but I don't think about them as how they affect what he does, and then everything that we do as parents to how it affects our children and what my parents did. Like, I don't think of the stories that feed me and how I behave because of them. And you really did that here in this book, and I just love that.
And I love that you noticed that because I've done a lot of really wonderful interviews, and I've even written a lot of stuff about this book myself. Nobody has quite pointed that out. And it is very much at the heart of what I did, because I was working on this book. I wasn't having huge success. I hung at it. I hung in there. And
Well, let's go back a little bit, because the rye bread marriage, what made you decide to write this book? This was not supposed to be a memoir. You were supposed to write about rye bread.
Yes.
So talk about that.
Okay, I'd written a book about coffee, and I was writing about food because writers were really encouraged to specialize. I had always been a generalist, and food had been throughout my life I'd been interested in food, and I'd been hosting dinner parties, and that was sort of the center of my marriage with John. So I was writing about food, and John, who is a scientist, started a teeny weeny little company importing rye bread from Latvia after the fall of the former Soviet Union. He was born in Latvia. He was a child. He was brought up in a DP camp. He has a very kind of dramatic escape story. And he came to the States, and he did what refugees do. They are required to get PhDs, and he did. Succeed, and he did. And he became a physicist and all of that. And so, but he is very involved in the Latvian past, and it's very much a part of his being. And when it was possible, he started importing this bread and selling this bread, and people, our foodie friends, were loving this bread, and it caused me to reassess, what does this bread mean?
Can we explain what the bread is? Because I think most people in America, if they're familiar with rye bread, they think rye bread in a deli, which is, kind of a flimsy, chewy bread that has a rye-like flavor. That's not what this bread is like. This is a heavy bread.
Yes, this is the bread from the old country.
Okay.
And his old country, and it turns out my old country, because I found that out in time. But so Latvian rye bread is made without any wheat whatsoever. It's an extremely dense, and it's made with 100% whole grain wheat that's ground, not like in Scandinavia where it's ground very coarse. It's actually ground medium fine. So you've got a very kind of refined crumb, as they call it. So it slices, and it makes a nice smooth slice. But it's dense. It's dense. You could commit murder with this bread.
Right.
And the bread is twice fermented. It's got a sour thing going, and what makes Latvian rye bread different from other rye breads is they use a little sugar. The sugar feeds the fermentation, but it also gives it a sweet and sour taste. And it's interesting because it's not. I don't mean that peasant foods are crude, but it's not. It's actually a refined kind of taste, rather than this is peasant bread and you must like it. It's more, this is bread to go with your lovely smoked salmon kind of bread. But anyway, so that bread had been a part of our life. So John started importing this. I had been required as the non-Latvian bride of a Latvian man to pretend that I loved this bread when his mother made it, but I hadn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
Did he know? Did you tell him that you did not like it, or did you keep that one in your? Did you keep that one to yourself?
Yeah, I could, but I certainly didn't express any great enthusiasm for it. And with my stepdaughters, I introduced French toast because breakfast. John loves to feed people, and he fed his children extremely well, but he was pretty rigid on the rye bread front.
You cannot make French toast with that rye bread.
No,
that is
you cannot.
For sure.
So when I first met my stepdaughters, they had never tasted French toast.
Oh.
These poor babies.
Right.
And so what I would do on Sundays with them is I would make French toast with homemade applesauce, which homemade applesauce is a very Latvian, Eastern European healthy thing to do.
Okay.
So, and then they would put cottage cheese on it. which is also very Eastern European. So
Is that Eastern European? Because in Israel, they have cottage cheese on everything. And the cottage cheese there is insane. It's so good. It's like got 9% fat or something. But I didn't know that was an Eastern European thing.
it's an Eastern European thing.
Fascinating.
My mother-in-law, I think, actually would, curdle her own milk and make her own homemade cottage cheese.
Wow.
But it's fascinating that they took this gift,
Right.
the French toast, and they turned it into this fusion meal.
Right.
And which is just incredibly sweet. And
So let's just talk a little bit about how the book came to be, because once your husband launched his business and you were deciding to write another book, and you are a food writer, what was it about the rye bread that you were like, I think I can do a book about this?
well, it was mostly how other people were responding to it. And
Okay.
and so John started this company, and they bought Zabar's was his first customer.
That's
Zabar's
amazing.
in New York,
Yeah, of
and
course.
then Rodman's here, and then all these wonderful food stores here, Wagshall's, and it invaded my thick head that people really like this.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I didn't entirely get it, there was something going on here. And that's sort of what happened with the coffee book, that it's the story. It's that you notice that there's a story and it's alive and it captures people, and that captured me way more than the bread. It was the story.
Sure.
So I've told you this once before, but I woke up one morning and I said to John, my next book is going to be called The Rye Bread Marriage.
It just popped into your head.
It popped into my head, and it's so apt because our marriage is very much shaped by John's Latvian identity and my not Latvian identity, in
Right.
fact. But so once I'm going to write, I think that if you're going to suffer and write a book, you must have a subject that requires a lot of travel. So
I agree.
this one,
Excellent.
This one required a lot of travel to Eastern Europe, and we started going in the summer, and I started meeting people and meeting bakers, and I was fascinated and hearing stories, but I didn't fully comprehend that the book was only going to work when it was not just about rye bread, but when it was about the rye bread marriage. As I had said in the title, that I didn't know what it meant.
Right.
And so I slowly discovered that the subject was John's story, which was his family story, which is very dramatic, and I love telling that. And it's about the bread and its deep, deep meaning culturally and historically, but it's about marriage. And many people love bread. A smaller number, but many people love rye bread. But
Right.
everybody's curious about marriage.
Oh, absolutely.
And I had to. Okay, the secret is that I had been teaching writing. I had been a student, and then I was teaching writing in a program called New Directions, which is a psychoanalytic. It's a writing program for psychotherapists and psychoanalysts.
Okay.
And I had an interest in psychology, and then I also had my first book was a history. I had a deep interest in history, and I was very interested in where they intersected. Well,
Sure.
they intersect in a marriage.
Sure.
That's what happens. And so, but the line that you mentioned, that the importance of his story and my story and how that makes a marriage, that was slow dawning. And it's as my drafts didn't work and they didn't go deep enough, that I'm a swimmer and a big believer in aerobic exercise for thinking things through. And I was swimming, and I was having a conversation as I swam with my book agent. And I was saying, Eleanor, I used to think that everybody had one story. But I realized that's not true. John isn't just a physicist who loves rye bread.
Right.
He has received all these stories from 1,000 years of Latvian ancestors. And I started thinking about that. And I started to think about how that human beings are created by stories we don't even know.
Sure.
But they shaped our ancestors, who then shape us. And the more I thought about that, and the more I realized what it meant, the difference between a man who comes from an agricultural culture, and a peasant culture, and a peasant culture where they've been tormented, but in peasant ways that have to do with the land. And me as a Jewish American, and coming from a culture where the word is what matters. John's a physicist. It's not that he doesn't think, but Latvian culture is built around manual labor and your ability to do it. I have never, and actually in Israel, I guess that's true. The Israelis went there and built a country with manual labor. But my Eastern European ancestors, you just study hard,
right?
So you don't get an education, so you don't have to do that kind of work,
right?
And it's a very different orientation towards work, and all these.
Actually, it's not just about work. It's about appreciation. Like, I think you have a very good point. When our families came over from wherever, all Eastern European, my family's all Eastern European, my husband's family's all Eastern European, when they came over, it was, you're going to study, you're going to do well, you're going to get an education, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is, because you're not going to be doing manual that. You're not going backwards. You're only going forward. Right. That was that vision, which I think is really interesting.
Yes,
because there's no appreciation for it.
No appreciation for the
manual labor.
Yes, and then Israel Jews started the country and changed their attitudes entirely.
Right.
But the Latvians are fascinating because. John's parents' generation are highly educated. That country was changing very fast when they lost their country to the former Soviet Union.
Sure.
But so there was a love of education and a valuation of it, which we share. But there was this, that a man is the beauty of his labor. And in the fights that we would have about shoveling snow,
oh, I can imagine.
Because I didn't think that was so meaningful. It's okay to complain about having to shovel snow because that's not what counts. And so there was a real clash of cultures there. And understanding that one wasn't right and the other wrong. That's that's the moment when I started to understand marriage, was when I started to understand, this is going to sound so silly, that John was as real to himself as I am to me. He is not a projection of my imagination, because we all live that way.
Of course we do. Well, and I think we also all live, as women especially, that, I'm right.
I have emotional intelligence.
Don't fold the towels that way, because that's totally wrong. I don't know what you're doing. So I do appreciate where you're coming from.
Exactly. And John came from a place where they didn't even use bath mats.
Right.
Oh,
right.
horror.
The horror. Yes, I have no doubt. So what was it about his stories that you learned? Like when you went back to Latvia, right? Because now you had to go back to learn about him. What was it about the stories that you learned that really informed you as you were writing this book?
So there's two answers to that. The first is that the history was so remarkable that these people were there's 2 million Latvians. It's a teeny place. And they had been invaded. They were more than invaded. They'd been invaded by everybody, but they had been controlled for most of their modern history doubly. By the Germans owned the land. The Germans came in 750 years ago, took all the best land, Christianized them, but took the best land and kept the land until the 19th century, middle of the 19th century. So the land is owned by the German landlords, and the Russians control the political structure. So it's like, what? They know.
Right.
And nevertheless, they had this culture which both it had, they honored the land. It wasn't that they were manual laborers and they did that to survive. They had a traditional, a pre-Christian religion that was really profoundly moving and full of honoring the land and honoring nature and the cycles of life. And then they had a literature that wasn't written down to the 19th century, which is made up of these ancient 4-line poems, which are stunningly beautiful and very, they're very writerly. They're very accessible to a writer because they're terse and they're very metaphorical. And all this stuff that John had talked about Latvian culture and why he was so enamored of it, well, when I brought my full intelligent self, I could see why this was a very beautiful culture. And perhaps every culture is a beautiful culture once you allow yourself
To see it.
to immerse in it. So I immersed in that, and that was so beautiful to me. And so then when I went to write, I wrote with so much more feeling and insight.
Well, because you now had this personal connection.
Yes.
Right? It's not just in a history book. This happened to somebody you love.
Well, and also that it isn't in the history books. I mean, it's in these 4-line poems, which are called Dietness, where people talk about overcoming the cruelties of the landlord, and by having pride, and by what is the song? But my favorite one is about stepping over the stone and singing, stepping over my sorrows and singing. It's about, they had this beauty and dignity to the culture that kind of blew me away. And
well, when you really delve deep and realize that, did that provide a greater understanding
Yes.
of your husband, of his mother, of his daughters? I mean, did it help inform
totally
the relationship?
Because then the more I understood that I didn't understand, the more I was willing to look at him with not my preconceptions, but with new eyes. And so there was an opening up. And I don't mean that I don't still act like,
what are you doing?
what are you doing?
Yes.
But there's a part of me now. What I was saying, that he is as real to him as I am to me.
Right.
And therefore, to know him, I need to know him, not just me.
It's so important, and it takes so long to get there. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're all running and gunning in our lives, children, work, the marriage, like being able to meet people where they are without the preconceived notions, I think it's just so tough. It really is.
It's lifelong work. It's
Yes.
lifelong work.
Yes.
And so I was teaching writing in this program, the psychoanalytic program. And the guy who was the head of, who founded this program, when I was working on this book, I went to see him not as a therapist, but as a friend. And I wanted to ask him about marriage because I knew he had done a lot of marriage. He'd treated couples.
Right.
And I said to him, do you think that couples ever work out their differences, resolve their differences was the word I used. He said no.
Okay.
Nobody resolves anything. And then he said, but if you're lucky, as you get older, you become more kind. And I think that is true of my marriage. I don't think we've resolved anything. I mean, except maybe...
Except now you like rye bread.
Yes, and I'm more, and maybe we laugh even more about the differences. We always were able to laugh about the differences to some extent, but I think we can laugh more.
Well, I think that's all anybody could really hope for at the end of the day. I want to go back a little bit. So for everybody who's listening, we're recording the show a second time because we were missing a mic. So I'm trying to remember what we talked about on this show and what we didn't. I'm trying to make sure we're not repeating ourselves. But I do want to go back to a part in the book because I really related to it. You talk about an experience with your mother-in-law because she did make the bread and you did not like the bread. But it's when your son was born. And I related to it so much because you were living in this world of abundance and you liked it. Who doesn't?
I wasn't even aware that I had those attitudes.
Right, exactly.
Right.
I mean, no, I think everything is hindsight. I can look at my childhood, my younger life, and recognize those things now, but when you're in it, who knows? I mean, plus I think people are talking about it in a different way now. I think the conversation has changed, but it's the 80s, you're cooking on a silver palette, you have this young son and you're
I'm poaching filet of sole for his supper.
Right,
what
exactly.
Can I say?
Right, exactly. No, I mean it is the 80s to the nth degree.
Right.
I hear what's happening. But she gets very upset because all she sees is waste. And you sort of say to her, like, you should want to be like me. Do you know what I mean? This sort of goes back to what you were just saying. Like, you should want to be like, we are abundant. We are in a good place. Like, why do you want to keep going back?
Right.
Well,
Well,
you know what I mean?
and that she. I just lost
Yes.
my thought. Sorry, but I had no idea. My mother-in-law basically took the food out of the garbage that I had thrown out because to me. Waste was, I never even gave it a thought. But when she
there's always more.
There's always more. When she criticized me, that's maternal control. Now that I knew, but now don't tell me what to do.
Right.
But it never occurred to me that she is a woman who had been a refugee in 2 world wars because my mother-in-law was older than my grandmother because of the weirdness with generations. And so she had been a refugee in World War I. They had escaped to the Caucasus from Latvia, and then she was a refugee in World War II, and they had escaped across Latvia, across Germany as the war was ending, and wound up in a DP camp for 5 years.
Wow.
So this is a woman who knew scarcity, and I was unable to recognize the imprint of that on the human, not just the heart, the soul, the being. I didn't know. But when I said to her, you don't have to eat garbage, like dismissively, and she looked at me and she said, it is nutrition, in her accented English.
Yes.
I at least had the brains and sensitivity to know that something profound had happened. Although, to tell you the truth, it took me another 15 years to figure out what it was. But I knew,
She's gone without.
she's gone without.
Sure.
And she can never forget that. You can never. When I talk about this book, people often ask me about the scene in the book, and after my
Because it really does stand out. And I think it's really relatable. Like you're sort of like at this, it's something that I think more and more people are recognizing within themselves in this day and age. Our privilege. And not being open-minded enough to recognize that not everybody's having the same experience.
or has had the same experience.
Exactly.
And in these book talks where people literally start to cry, or people stand up, and I'm talking about, you have no idea that this is what they're carrying. And then they will say, well, I was from Romania, or I was from wherever, and the former Soviet Union, and we didn't have whatever. And you realize, it's not only that the past isn't past, but when it comes to food, the past is so imprinted. People never get over it, and you never look at the resources in the same way. And I am still me, and I still secretly throw things out.
Sure.
And the funny thing about John, because all people are inconsistent. I mean, John will have a fit about this little bit of bread that's left over, but does he notice this beautiful salmon, then I'm out of town for 3 days, and why didn't you eat that? Oh, I didn't even see it.
Right.
So I mean, nobody's perfect
Of course.
in this regard, but but I'm much more sympathetic, and I'm much more, and I realize, that the whole issue of hunger, which is a living issue in America today, and for people, for all kinds of people,
Sure.
in all parts of the country, and I really never knew that.
Right. No, I agree. And especially, I think, if you think back on your own history, how you were brought up and where you came from, like, if it's not in your face, and if you're not surrounded by people who are talking about it, then you really don't see it, right?
It's really easy to be entitled. It doesn't make you a bad person.
No.
If your parents told you you were entitled, you believe it.
Right.
And they don't have to use that word. And I think that what's required then is to try to understand better. Especially if you're a writer.
Right. Well, but you really put your journalistic chops in this book. Do you know what I mean? You did so much research, but you also did a lot of self-exploration. So what would you say at the end of the day, like, you really came away with?
Okay. Well, for me, nobody's asked me this, and I'm going to tell you the exact truth. I had spent my life, I had written hundreds of articles, and I'd written 3 other books, and I'd spent my life haunted by the sense that I had never lived up to my potential.
Okay.
As a writer. And this book, I feel as if I wrote the best book that I could write at the time. And it gave me a kind of peace and a sort of self-regard in the good sense of self-regard that I kind of never expected I was going to get to. And I think it's so, when I look at our kids now, I so want them to have what I've been rich enough to have, which is, rich emotionally, and is a second act and a third act, and as many acts as you are healthy enough and can make happen. That life isn't just one career that is completed at age 60 or 65. It's, you open all kinds of doors if you're lucky, and I've been very lucky, and that's what this book means to me. So I'd like to write at least one more.
Okay.
But I'm a different writer than I was when I started this one.
Oh, I love that. Oh, we're always growing.
We're always growing.
Right?
And it is the gift.
I agree.
Right.
I'm going to end it there because that was perfect. So the rye bread marriage, how I found happiness with a partner I'll never understand. I relate to that in so many ways. The wonderful Michael Weissman joined me today. Please find your book. Go to Politics and Prose or go to small bookstores because that's the best place to buy books. But of course, you can get it on Amazon and everywhere. So thank you so much for joining me today. Sit for a second. I'm going to wrap this up. So I am at the Capitol Jewish Museum. We have done another fabulous show. Come see the exhibit. I'll have what she's having. But even if you don't come for the exhibit, come and just hang out. They have a gorgeous atrium downstairs where you can just sit and have coffee and work, which is what I do now. It's just beautiful here, so you should really come and check it out. Of course, you want to follow me at NYCCINELLIS on all your social media platforms. And please subscribe to YouTube. Any questions that you have, you can pop me a line on any of those platforms. I'm always getting back to everyone, whether it's a restaurant to go to or something you heard today. I'm happy to get back to you on it. So thanks for joining us today. Be safe out there and have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.